I still remember the day of Grandpa's will reading as if it were yesterday. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with tension, mixed with the faint scent of old leather chairs and polished wood. Family members whispered to one another, some fidgeting in their seats, others pretending casual interest, but all of them waiting for the moment when everything would be revealed. I had been nervous all morning, my stomach a knot of anticipation and dread. After all, our family had always had favorites. My brother, Daniel, had been the golden child from the very beginning, charming, confident, and seemingly deserving of every blessing Grandpa ever gave. I, on the other hand, had been overlooked, often dismissed with a pat on the head or a simple, "You'll figure it out." I'd always wondered if Grandpa even truly saw me, but today, I hoped he would prove me wrong. As the lawyer shuffled the thick envelopes across the mahogany table, I tried to keep my hands steady. Grandpa had always been a man of cryptic gestures, and I knew better than to expect straightforward fairness. Still, I couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, he had left me something meaningful. The first envelope went to Daniel, and he tore it open with that infuriating grin I knew too well. The amount inside was staggering, $700,000. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, all eyes on him, marveling at his fortune. Daniel's eyes sparkled as he looked around, clearly enjoying the gasps and murmurs of admiration from our relatives. And then it was my turn. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I took the small, plain envelope marked with my name. I had imagined something substantial. Maybe a check, a deed, or even a letter filled with Grandpa's wisdom. But as I peeled it open, all I found were 2 crumpled dollars. My chest tightened, and I felt heat rise to my face. I could hear the room, the snickers and whispered remarks, the barely concealed smirks on the faces of my parents. Daniel held up his stack of bills like a trophy, laughing, and some distant cousin muttered under his breath, "Well, that's interesting." I couldn't believe it. $2. That was all I had inherited from the man I thought had always loved me equally. Humiliation washed over me in waves, each one heavier than the last. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed hard, forcing myself to maintain some semblance of composure. My parents leaned back in their chairs, exchanging knowing glances, clearly enjoying the spectacle. It was the same story, the same script I had been living with my whole life. Daniel gets the applause, I get the punchline. But then, something caught my eye. Nestled beneath the $2 bill was a small, folded piece of paper. My fingers shook as I unfolded it, revealing Grandpa's handwriting. Elegant, familiar, unmistakable. The note read, "Use this wisely. It will lead you where they can't follow." My initial shock shifted into confusion. Was this some kind of joke? A hidden message? My mind raced, trying to parse the meaning behind the cryptic words. Could Grandpa really have meant this? Or was it some final cruel trick, a way to mock me one last time? I left the lawyer's office that day feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. The laughter, the whispers, Daniel's triumphant smile. They burned in my mind. I wanted to confront everyone, to demand why I had been treated this way. But something about Grandpa's note held me back. There was a subtle insistence in his words, a hint that he had not truly abandoned me, that there was more to this than what met the eye. And so, I tucked the 2 crumpled dollars and the note into my jacket pocket and walked out, pretending to be unaffected while my heart pounded in my chest. At home, Daniel couldn't resist flaunting his new wealth. He strutted around the house, showing off the cash and boasting about how Grandpa had obviously favored him. Our parents laughed along, offering compliments and congratulations as if I weren't even in the room. Every time I tried to speak, to ask about the note or the reasoning behind this apparent favoritism, I was brushed off or met with irritation. The entire afternoon was a blur of envy, humiliation, and simmering anger. I felt trapped in a family that celebrated injustice and overlooked integrity. As night fell, I found myself alone in my room, staring at the $2 bill on my desk. The note sat beside it, a silent challenge that I couldn't ignore. I ran my fingers over the worn paper, thinking back to all the times Grandpa had spoken to me about resilience and perseverance, about how life was not about taking what was given, but about finding your own path. Could it be that this small inheritance, seemingly insignificant, was actually a test? A way to see if I would rise above the humiliation, if I would fight rather than fold. The next few days were a mixture of anger and reflection. I replayed memories of Grandpa, of moments he had singled me out in private, offering subtle lessons disguised as tough love. I remembered how he had taken me on those long walks through the park when I was a child, telling me stories about strategy, patience, and foresight. It was then I realized that maybe the $2 were not meant to humiliate me, but to ignite something. A spark of determination, a call to action that no one else in the family could understand. Despite the sting of public embarrassment, I began to plan. I would not let this moment define me. Daniel may have inherited money, but I had inherited the one thing he lacked: the ability to see beyond the surface, to follow the breadcrumbs left by a man who had known me better than anyone. The note was the key, and I intended to unlock whatever secret lay behind it. And so, the stage was set. My humiliation had transformed into a quiet resolve. I would follow Grandpa's instructions, decipher the meaning of his message, and uncover what he had left for me. Little did I know then that the journey ahead would reveal truths about my family I had never imagined. Truths that would shake my world and force me to confront not only the betrayal of others, but the resilience within myself. The first step, I realized, would be understanding the significance of the $2. What was Grandpa trying to show me? Why this seemingly trivial amount? And most importantly, what lay ahead in the path he had left only for me, the path no one else could follow? These questions haunted me, fueled my determination, and promised that the story of this inheritance was far from over. As I closed my eyes that night, the $2 in my hand and the note beside me, I felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The laughter of my family still echoed in my ears, but it no longer held power over me. For the first time, I understood that Grandpa's final lesson was not about wealth, but about character, and I was ready to discover what he had truly left me. The days after the will reading were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. Everywhere I went, I could feel the weight of my family's judgment pressing down on me. Daniel flaunted his wealth at every opportunity, laughing in the way that always made me feel small, as if my existence was a punchline. My parents never offered comfort, only subtle jabs, telling me I should learn to accept life's lessons, and that Daniel had earned every penny. The $2 in my pocket felt heavier than any gold bar, a constant reminder of their mockery. Yet Grandpa's note whispered in my mind, persistent and enigmatic. Use this wisely. It will lead you where they can't follow. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke, another layer of humiliation. But as I stared at the crumpled bills, a flicker of curiosity ignited within me. What could it mean? Why leave me so little if he truly wanted to reward me? There had to be more to this, something hidden beneath the surface. I began retracing Grandpa's old habits, remembering the stories he told me as a child. He had always been meticulous, leaving clues in plain sight for those who knew how to look. I remembered the afternoons we spent in the diner near his old home, sipping coffee while he sketched out business ideas on napkins. He always paid with a $2 bill, telling me, "Some things are meant to stand out, but only if you notice." I had brushed it off at the time as another quirky habit, but now the memory hit me with clarity. The $2 weren't just money. They were a marker, a clue meant for me alone. The next morning, I visited that diner, unsure if it still existed after all these years. To my relief, it had. The same faded red booths, the faint smell of coffee and pancakes, the clinking of silverware against plates. It was as if time had frozen. I approached the counter, and the elderly waitress who had served Grandpa remembered him immediately. "Oh, you must be his grandson," she said, her eyes twinkling. He loved leaving those little bills behind, little messages tucked away for those who would pay attention. My heart raced. I asked her if she knew of any messages or boxes Grandpa might have left. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. He left a deposit box in town. Always said it was for the one who could see past the obvious. She reached under the counter and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a key, and a second note, written in the same elegant script. "If you're reading this, it means you didn't give up. What's truly yours is hidden where no one else dared to look." A mix of excitement and fear coursed through me. This was real. Grandpa had set up a a series of steps that would lead to something far greater than the $700,000 Daniel had so casually inherited. The weight of his plan pressed on me. Not just to find it, but to prove I was worthy of it. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about resilience, intelligence, and character. But even as I held the key, I knew I wasn't safe from my family's scrutiny. Daniel was still flaunting his newfound wealth, inviting friends over to show off his cars, his gadgets, and his extravagant gifts. Each day, the contrast between our fortunes stung more sharply. At first, I felt envy and anger. But as I began following Grandpa's instructions, a quiet determination replaced those feelings. Daniel's wealth was temporary. The secret Grandpa had left me was permanent, but only if I could find it. I began investigating the deposit box location, piecing together memories and clues Grandpa had left in conversations over the years. Each detail mattered. A casual remark about a safe deposit, a glance toward a certain shelf in the diner, the way he had always emphasized patience and observation. I documented everything in a small notebook, each note a breadcrumb leading me closer to the hidden treasure. At night, I would lay awake, thinking through the puzzle. The $2 bill, the key, the notes, all were part of a larger design. I imagined Grandpa watching over me, knowing that he had to guide me indirectly. The thought filled me with warmth and a strange kind of comfort, even as my family continued to mock me. I wasn't just following a trail, I was honoring his legacy, proving that I could see what others overlooked. One evening, as I retraced the steps Grandpa had taken during his life, I noticed something in a family photo that had been hanging in our living room for years. Grandpa was holding a $2 bill, standing in front of what looked like a small, nondescript building. I compared it to recent maps and realized it matched the exterior of an old storage facility on the edge of town, the likely location of the deposit box. My pulse quickened. The next day, I made my way to the facility. It was quiet, abandoned in appearance, but the address matched perfectly. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through high windows. I located a small locker that seemed out of place among the others, and with trembling hands, I inserted Grandpa's key. The lock clicked open, revealing a box inside. My hands shook as I lifted the lid, revealing stacks of documents, a few sealed envelopes, and another folded note. The note read, "You've made it this far. Patience, observation, and courage have brought you here. What is inside this box is only the beginning. The rest lies where no one else dares to look, and only you have the patience to see it." My eyes widened. Grandpa had designed this meticulously, leaving a trail that no one else could follow, even Daniel. I realized then that the $2, seemingly insignificant, had been a test of character, a challenge that would separate me from the rest of our greedy family. I left the storage facility feeling a mix of triumph and anticipation. The path was clear, and yet the next step was shrouded in mystery. Grandpa had orchestrated something far beyond a simple inheritance, and I was determined to uncover it. I thought of Daniel, of our parents, and of everyone who had mocked me. They would never understand, not until I had completed Grandpa's challenge. As I walked home, I tucked the key and the documents into my bag, feeling a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. This was no longer about money or humiliation. It was about proving myself, about honoring the wisdom Grandpa had imparted, and about stepping into a role that my family had never imagined I could fill. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with puzzles and hidden truths, but I was ready. And somewhere deep inside, I felt Grandpa's presence guiding me, reminding me that resilience and perception mattered more than wealth or approval. Daniel had inherited the surface-level riches, but I had inherited the real legacy, one that required patience, intelligence, and courage. The game was just beginning, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally playing by Grandpa's rules. The night settled in, and I sat by my desk, the $2 bill and the key before me. I realized that what I held in my hands was more than just a clue. It was a symbol of trust, a challenge, and a promise. Grandpa had left me something no one else could claim, and I would see it through, step by step, until the truth was revealed. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. The key and the documents from the storage box sat neatly on my desk, like the first pieces of a map that would lead me to something far greater than I had imagined. The house was quiet, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside. But inside, my mind raced with possibilities. Grandpa had left me a puzzle, one that required patience, courage, and a mind sharp enough to follow his trail. I had proven myself by finding the first clue. Now it was time to uncover the rest. I started by carefully examining the documents, noticing patterns in the handwriting, references to properties, and subtle notes that seemed almost hidden in the margins. Grandpa's meticulous nature shone through each page. There were deeds to properties, business ledgers, stock certificates, and correspondence indicating ownership stakes in several small companies he had quietly run over the years. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a financial fortune. It was an empire that no one else in the family knew about. I pieced together the information, tracing addresses and assets, and discovered that all of them pointed to a single, abandoned workshop on the outskirts of town. Grandpa had left detailed instructions in the letters, hinting that this location held the key to everything he had truly valued. I knew that Daniel and my parents would never think to look here. The brilliance of Grandpa's plan was clear. He had intentionally hidden the real inheritance in plain sight, only for the one who could see past envy, greed, and impatience. When I arrived at the workshop, the building looked almost forgotten. Dust coated the windows, and the paint was peeling from years of neglect. I pushed open the heavy door, and a wave of musty air greeted me. Sunlight filtered through the grime-covered windows, casting long shadows across the floor. My footsteps echoed as I made my way inside, heart racing with anticipation. There, in the center of the room, stood a large chest, sealed with a padlock that matched the key Grandpa had given me. With hands that trembled slightly from excitement, I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, and I lifted the lid to reveal stacks of papers, binders, and envelopes. Among them were property deeds, titles, and certificates proving ownership of businesses, real estate, and investments that, combined, far exceeded Daniel's $700,000. I could hardly believe my eyes. Grandpa had left me not just money, but a true legacy, one that required intelligence, patience, and courage to claim. A final letter rested on top of the pile, written in Grandpa's unmistakable script. To my grandchild, who has proven the qualities I valued most: resilience, perception, and integrity. Daniel inherited what was easy, but you have earned what truly matters. Use it wisely, and never forget that character is the most valuable inheritance of all. My hands shook as I read the words, a mixture of awe, relief, and triumph coursing through me. Grandpa's plan had been flawless, a testament to his wisdom and understanding of human nature. I realized then that Daniel and my parents had underestimated me entirely. Their focus on wealth, appearances, and immediate gratification had blinded them to what truly mattered. I had followed the clues, remained patient, and demonstrated the qualities Grandpa had valued most. Now, I held a fortune far beyond their wildest dreams, and with it, the power to make them see that life was not always fair, but justice could be served in unexpected ways. I spent the next few days organizing the documents, verifying ownership, and planning my next move. I knew that the family would eventually discover what I had found, and I wanted the moment of revelation to be as impactful as possible. The thrill of anticipation mingled with a sense of vindication. I had been mocked, ridiculed, and overlooked, but now the tables were about to turn. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Daniel had invited the family over for a gathering, a show of his new wealth and status. As they laughed and toasted, I arrived quietly, carrying the key documents with me. The room fell silent as I stepped forward, a calm confidence in my demeanor that they had never seen before. Daniel's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I have something to share," I began, holding up the documents. "You all celebrated $700,000 as the inheritance from Grandpa, thinking it was the entirety of his legacy. But there's more, much more, and it was never meant to be obvious." I laid out the deeds, titles, and certificates across the table. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as realization dawned on everyone. Daniel's face went pale, and our parents could only stare, mouths agape. I continued, my voice steady. Grandpa left the true inheritance for the one who could see beyond the obvious, who had patience, intelligence, and courage. Daniel, you inherited money, but I inherited his true legacy. The businesses, properties, and investments he quietly built over decades. Everything you thought you had, everything you bragged about, is only a fraction of what is real. The room was silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Daniel tried to speak, to argue, to reclaim his perceived superiority. But I could see the disbelief and shock in his eyes. Our parents looked as though they had been punched, realizing that their favoritism and mockery had blinded them to what Grandpa had intended all along. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice that was both earned and deserved. I raised a glass, looking each of them in the eye. Funny how $2 bought me everything money can't buy, and everything you thought you deserved. I set the glass down and turned, leaving the room with a calm confidence. They were left speechless, confronted with the truth that the real inheritance had always been about character, perception, and perseverance, qualities they had failed to recognize. As I walked away from the gathering, the weight of the past months lifted from my shoulders. Grandpa's plan had been more than a lesson. It was a revelation, a way to ensure that his true legacy would go to the one who deserved it most. I felt a sense of completion, knowing that I had honored his wisdom and proved my worth. The laughter, the mockery, and the envy no longer had power over me. The journey had been challenging, filled with uncertainty and doubt, but it had also been transformative. I had discovered not only Grandpa's secret inheritance, but also the strength within myself to persevere, to follow a trail that no one else could, and to emerge victorious in the face of humiliation and betrayal. The $2 were more than money. They were the key to understanding the values Grandpa held dear and the guide to a legacy that would last a lifetime. In the quiet moments that followed, I allowed myself a smile, thinking of Grandpa and the intricate plan he had left behind. The family might never fully understand the depth of his wisdom, but I did. And that knowledge, that inheritance of insight and character, was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. I walked out into the sunlight, the documents secure, the legacy claimed, and the satisfaction of a journey completed filling me with a quiet pride. Daniel, my parents, and the rest of the family could only watch, powerless to undo what had been revealed. Grandpa's final lesson had been learned, and I had emerged not just as the true heir to his wealth, but as the keeper of his values, his vision, and his trust. The story that had begun with $2 and a cryptic note had reached its conclusion, but,